"We can't use this report," my supervisor said, throwing my analysis onto his desk. "It's too detailed. Way too detailed." He ran his fingers through his thinning hair, exasperation painting his features. "Nobody wants to read 64 pages analyzing transaction patterns. Vera, the chief needs something he can understand in 5 minutes." I stood there, my hands trembling slightly as I watched 3 weeks of sleepless nights dismissed with a casual flick of his wrist. The report represented the most thorough financial crimes analysis I'd ever produced. "But Paul, these pension fund discrepancies show a clear internal pattern. If you just look at page 37, Stop." Paul held up his hand. "We're pursuing the external breach angle. That's what everyone expects. That's what makes sense." He leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing. "You're still new to how things work here. Sometimes being too thorough just muddies the water." His words hit like a physical weight on my chest. I'd traced millions in missing city worker pension funds to a series of perfectly timed administrative approvals that coincidentally benefited people in our own department. "This report makes it look like we're accusing our colleagues," Paul continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Do you understand how that would play out? How it would reflect on this department? On me?" I swallowed hard. "But what if—" "That's enough, Vera." He slid my report into his drawer rather than the trash bin. Somehow worse, knowing it would be buried rather than discarded outright. "Stick to the assigned angle. Rewrite this focusing only on the external server vulnerabilities. 20 pages max. Use bullet points." As I turned to leave, he added, "Oh, and clear your schedule for the Davis testimonial on Thursday. I'll need you to take notes while I conduct the interview." The Davis testimonial. My investigation had flagged Edward Davis as a key witness 3 weeks ago, but Paul had repeatedly delayed interviewing him. Now he was swooping in to conduct it himself. I returned to my cramped cubicle, the fluorescent lighting buzzing above as I slumped into my chair. 2 years of being the invisible analyst in the city's financial crimes unit, and nothing had changed. My insights were consistently repackaged, simplified beyond recognition, or outright ignored. My desk phone rang, startling me from my thoughts. "Financial crimes? Vera speaking." "Ms. Kelman, this is Chief Amara's office." The crisp, efficient voice belonged to the department chief's assistant. "The chief requests your presence immediately in conference room A." "My presence? Are you sure?" "Yes. Bring all materials related to the pension fund investigation. The chief specifically asked for you by name." The line went dead before I could ask any further questions. My heart hammered against my ribs as I gathered my files, including a backup copy of my complete report. Walking into conference room A, I immediately sensed the tension. The entire Financial Oversight Committee sat around the table, expressions grim. Paul stood awkwardly in the corner, his usual confident posture replaced by something stiffer, uncertain. Chief Amara, a commanding woman who'd risen through the ranks despite the department's notorious boys' club atmosphere, nodded at me. "Miss Kelman, please sit." As I took my seat, she slid a folder across the table, pages from my original report. "Someone anonymously delivered key sections of your analysis directly to the mayor's office this morning," she explained, her voice even. "These allegations about internal manipulation of the pension funds, can you substantiate every claim in here?" Before I could answer, Paul stepped forward. "Chief, Vera is relatively inexperienced and tends to overcomplicate. It's on the Civas." "I didn't ask you, Paul," Chief Amara cut him off sharply. "In fact, your presence here is merely courtesy before you're placed on administrative leave pending review." The room fell silent, Paul's face drained of color. The chief turned back to me. "Well, Ms. Kelman," I took a deep breath. "Yes, I can substantiate everything. I have the complete documentation, transaction histories, approval records, and timeline analyses. Then effective immediately, you'll lead this investigation under my direct supervision." Wait, did I just hear that correctly? I struggled to keep my expression neutral as Paul's jaw literally dropped. If you're as shocked as Paul right now, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about professional underdogs turning the tables. Comment below if you've ever had your hard work dismissed by someone who should have appreciated it. My name is Vera Kelman, and until that moment in conference room A, I'd been the anonymous number cruncher who received neither credit nor acknowledgement. At 32, I'd spent my career being told I was too meticulous, unnecessarily detailed, and, my personal favorite, lacking big picture perspective. The truth? I see patterns where others see random data. My mind naturally connects dots across seemingly unrelated transactions. It's not a skill I developed, it's how my brain has always worked. My parents recognized it early. As a child, I'd reorganize my books by subtle color gradients rather than alphabetically. I'd create elaborate systems for my toys based on characteristics nobody else considered important. My father, a high school mathematics teacher, nurtured this tendency. My mother, who worked in banking, showed me how to apply it to financial systems. I joined the city's financial crimes unit with idealistic visions of using my natural abilities to protect people from sophisticated schemes. Instead, I found myself relegated to background research, while men with half my analytical skills presented watered-down versions of my findings. Paul Renner had been my supervisor for all 2 years of my employment. He'd built his career by simplifying complex financial analyses into digestible snippets for higher-ups. What he actually did was strip away critical nuance and context, presenting oversimplified conclusions that aligned with expectations rather than evidence. The pension fund case was supposed to be my breakthrough. Thousands of city workers, teachers, maintenance workers, public health nurses had discovered their retirement accounts mysteriously depleted. The official story pointed to external hackers. My analysis suggested otherwise. As I walked back to my cubicle after the meeting with Chief Amara, whispers followed me. Overnight, I'd transformed from invisible analyst to lead investigator on the department's most high-profile case. My small desk suddenly seemed inadequate for the task ahead. I requested a temporary workspace, and by afternoon, I was setting up in a small conference room dedicated to the investigation. I pinned timeline charts to the walls, spread transaction records across the table, and began rebuilding the case properly. With official authority now, I could request original documents rather than working from copies and fragments. Kelman, a voice interrupted my concentration. I turned to find Detective Ash leaning against the doorframe. Nolan Ash had been with the department for 15 years and carried himself with the easy confidence of someone who belonged anywhere he stood. Detective, I nodded, unsure why he'd sought me out. Heard your running point on the pension case now. He studied the papers spreading across my workspace. Quite the promotion. Did you need something? I asked, protective of my newly granted authority. He smiled slightly. Actually, I came to offer help. I interviewed 3 of the administrators when this first broke. Something felt off, but I couldn't place it. Maybe a detailed approach might find what I missed. The way he said detailed lacked Paul's usual condescension. I gestured to an empty chair. I'd appreciate your perspective. I'd appreciate your perspective. For the next hour, Detective Ash walked me through his initial interviews, describing not just what was said, but behavioral nuances my data couldn't capture. Nervous tics, inconsistent eye contact, particular phrases repeated under pressure. Why are you helping me? I finally asked. He leaned back, considering. My mother lost 30% of her pension in this mess. 30 years as a city librarian, and now she's taking a part-time job at 71. His jaw tightened. Also, Paul Renner is an obstructive, credit-stealing bureaucrat who's been burying good work for years. You noticed that? Everyone with functioning eyes noticed that, Kelman. He stood to leave. Check the April 7th transaction batch. Something happened that day that nobody wants to talk about. As Detective Ash left, another figure appeared in the doorway. Paula Davis, a senior analyst who'd always been cordial but distant. Vera, she said quietly, glancing over her shoulder before entering. I need to show you something, but not here. Can you meet me after hours? The seriousness in her expression sent a chill through me. Where? The coffee shop across from the library. 7 o'clock. She slipped away before I could question her further. By 6:30 that evening, my initial excitement had morphed into unease. The more I examined the records, the more deliberate the pattern of theft appeared. This wasn't opportunistic crime. It was calculated, systematic draining of funds through administrative processes designed to avoid detection. And at the center of several key approvals was a name that made my stomach clench. Retired investigator Thomas Weldon, Paul's mentor and weekly golf partner. The coffee shop was nearly empty when I arrived. Paula sat in the far corner, a manila envelope on the table before her. She'd been with the department for 15 years and had a reputation for keeping her head down and her opinions to herself. I shouldn't be doing this, she said as I sat down, but I can't sleep at night anymore. She slid the envelope toward me. Inside were printed copies of emails, correspondence between Paul, Thomas Weldon, and several city administrators. How did you get these? I asked, scanning the damning contents. They discussed adjustments to the pension fund, reallocation strategies, and most disturbingly, containment of potential whistleblowers. I was copied on one by mistake 2 years ago. After that, I created a filter to capture anything with similar phrasing. Paula's hands trembled slightly as she gripped her coffee cup. They've been siphoning money systematically for at least 5 years. Small amounts from thousands of accounts, adding up to millions. Why didn't you report this? Her eyes met mine, filled with shame and fear. The last person who questioned similar discrepancies was found with illegal material on their work computer. They swore they were framed. Nobody believed them. I slid the envelope into my bag, my mind racing. Thank you for this. I'll protect your involvement. Be careful, Vera, Paula whispered. They've been getting away with this for years because they're willing to do whatever it takes to keep it hidden. As I walked to my car, the weight of what I'd uncovered pressed down on me. This wasn't just about missing money anymore. It was about corruption at the core of the very department tasked with preventing financial crimes. My apartment became an extension of my workspace. Each night, I pieced together fragments, connecting Paula's emails with transaction records and approval documents. I created a comprehensive timeline showing how the pension funds had been systematically drained through seemingly legitimate administrative processes. Every morning, I arrived at work expecting to be stopped, to find my access revoked or my investigation reassigned. But Chief Amara proved to be a powerful shield. When records I requested were mysteriously delayed, she personally intervened. When witnesses suddenly became unavailable, she made them available again. 1 week into my investigation, I received my first direct threat. It was a blank envelope slipped under my apartment door. Inside, a single photograph of me entering Paula's building the previous night, clearly taken from a parked car. Scrawled across the back, team players keep their benefits. The implied threat sent ice through my veins. How had they known about the meeting? Who was watching me? I considered calling Chief Amara, but hesitated. What if her phone was monitored? What if she wasn't truly the ally I believed her to be? I tucked the photograph into my evidence file and doubled my vigilance. That morning, I altered my routine, taking an indirect route to work and watching for vehicles that might be following me. The investigation room felt different when I arrived, subtly disturbed, though nothing was obviously missing. My instinct said someone had been through my materials. I began keeping critical documents with me at all times, and creating decoy files with slightly altered information. Detective Ash appeared in my doorway around noon. "You look like someone who found something they wish they hadn't," he observed. I considered my options, then showed him the photograph. His expression hardened. "This crosses a line. I'm putting a patrol car near your place tonight. That might make it worse," I argued. "I need to appear unfazed." "Then at least take this." He handed me a small recording device disguised as a keychain. "Keep it with you. Record everything." As days passed, the obstacles multiplied. Critical transaction histories became corrupted in the system. Key witnesses suddenly changed their statements or claimed memory lapses. The retired investigator's financial records were declared classified by someone in administrative services. I compiled a list of everyone who had both the authority and opportunity to interfere with my investigation. The pattern was clear. They all connected back to a small group centered around Thomas Weldon, with Paul as his primary facilitator. 2 weeks into my investigation, I discovered something that made the stakes painfully personal. Digging through beneficiary lists, I found my own mother's name. As a former City Parks Department employee, her modest pension had been reduced by nearly 20%, money she counted on for her heart medication. That night, I worked until my eyes burned, tracing the approval chain that had specifically targeted her account. The signature authorizing the reallocation belonged to Paul himself. The next morning, Paula was waiting by my car when I left my apartment. "They're cleaning house," she whispered, her face pale. "3 people have been encouraged to retire since yesterday. All people who had access to the April records you've been requesting. Do they know about you?" I asked. "I don't think so. Not yet." She pressed a USB drive into my hand. "I made copies of everything I could access before they lock me out too. There's something else. They've scheduled an emergency oversight committee meeting for tomorrow. Word is they're planning to announce a resolution to the case." "That's impossible. We're nowhere near." "They're going to blame it on a deceased IT administrator who can't defend himself." They've been building the paper trail for days. After Paula left, I sat in my car, the USB drive heavy in my palm. They were accelerating their cover-up. I needed to move faster. At work, the atmosphere had shifted perceptibly. Colleagues, who had begun tentatively speaking to me, now avoided eye contact. As I walked to my temporary investigation room, I overheard snippets of conversation that stopped abruptly when I appeared. The door to my workspace was locked. Strange, since I'd never locked it. Inside, Chief Amara was waiting, her expression unreadable. "Ms. Kelman," she said formally, "I've been reviewing your progress on this investigation." My pulse quickened. I've made significant headway, despite numerous obstacles. If I could just, Tim, the Oversight Committee has concerns about your approach. She remained standing, maintaining the power dynamic. They feel the investigation has become unfocused. Unfocused? I repeated, disbelieving. I've uncovered direct links between internal approvals and missing funds. I've seen your files. Chief Amara's voice remained even. The committee believes you're pursuing an unnecessarily complex theory when simpler explanations exist. The betrayal stung worse than anything Paul had ever done. I had believed Chief Amara was different, that she wanted the truth. Now she stood before me, using the same dismissive language, the same coded message. "Stop looking where you're not supposed to look." "You're taking me off the case," I stated flatly. "Not exactly." She handed me a folder. "The department physician has recommended you take administrative leave for stress-related concerns. 2 weeks, fully paid." I never saw any physician. "The recommendation is based on observation of your recent behavior, working excessive hours, displaying paranoid tendencies, making accusations against senior staff." I opened the folder. The medical recommendation was dated the previous day, signed by a doctor I'd never met. "This is fabricated," I said quietly. Chief Amara's expression flickered. "Too? With guilt? Regret? The decision has been made, Miss Kelman. Security will escort you to collect your personal belongings." As she turned to leave, I asked, "What changed? You seemed committed to finding the truth, no matter where it led." She paused at the door. "Sometimes the clearest path forward requires compromise." By noon, I had been effectively removed from the department. My building access was revoked, my case files confiscated, and my investigation officially reassigned to a senior analyst known for his cursory reviews and rapid case closures. Rain tapped against my apartment windows that evening as I spread Paula's copied files across my living room floor. The USB drive contained more than I'd expected. Internal emails, transaction approvals, meeting minutes marked confidential. Detective Ash called around midnight. "They're moving fast," he said without preamble. "Tomorrow's oversight meeting has been closed to general staff. They're announcing a resolution to the case, blaming a systems administrator who died last year." "Harold Kim," I supplied. "I saw the files they're fabricating. You need to lay low, Kelman. This goes higher than Paul or even Weldon. The mayor's office is involved now." "The mayor? Why would he?" Then it clicked. "The investment firm. The one that manages the city's reallocated funds. Bingo. The mayor's brother-in-law sits on their board. This isn't just about stealing pension money. It's about where that money went afterward." After we hung up, I stared at the scattered evidence surrounding me. They had taken my official authority, my access, and my platform. By tomorrow, they would announce their fabricated resolution, and the case would be officially closed. I had been naive to think that simply being right would be enough. Around 3 a.m., as rain continued to drum against my windows, I made a decision. They had taken everything from me except my analytical mind, the very thing they had always dismissed as too thorough and too detailed. I would use it against them. For the next 2 days, I barely slept. I transformed my living room into an analysis center, connecting dots across thousands of transactions. I created a simplified presentation, just 5 slides. No jargon, no complex traces, just crystal clear connections between the missing millions and specific decisions approved by Paul, Weldon, and their associates. The beauty of it was that I included only irrefutable public information anyone could verify. Every document I referenced was publicly available in city records, if you knew exactly where to look. On day 3, I pulled up the city council's public meeting schedule. As a city employee, technically still employed while on administrative leave, I had the right to request a 3-minute public comment slot at the upcoming council meeting. I submitted my request through the online portal, listing my topic simply as pension fund management concerns. The day of the council meeting arrived. I dressed professionally, packed my simple presentation slides, and arrived early. Paul was there in the audience, smirking when he saw me approach the sign-in table. He clearly believed I was making a futile, desperate move. When my name was called, I walked calmly to the podium with only my 5 slides and a few index cards. The council members looked bored already. They'd been listening to public comments for over an hour. "My name is Vera Kelman," I began. "I'm a financial analyst with the city's Financial Crimes Unit, currently on administrative leave. The pension fund investigation has officially been closed, with blame assigned to a deceased IT administrator. But I've prepared a very brief explanation that demonstrates why that conclusion is impossible." Paul's smirk faltered slightly. From the corner of my eye, I noticed Chief Amara slip into the back of the room, her expression tense. I displayed my first slide, a simple timeline showing 5 key dates when pension funds were reallocated. On these dates, significant pension funds were moved through a specific approval process. Each movement required 3 separate authorizations. I advanced to the next slide, showing the authorization chain. These signatures appear on all 5 major transactions. The council chambers had grown quieter. Several council members leaned forward, their attention captured by the simplicity of my presentation. The official explanation claims Harold Kim, who died last year, manipulated these transfers. However, I advanced to the 3rd slide, showing dates of employment and system access records. Mr. Kim did not have access to 2 of the required authorization systems and was on documented medical leave during 3 of these 5 dates. Paul was no longer smirking. He had pulled out his phone and appeared to be texting frantically. More importantly, I continued, advancing to my 4th slide. Each of these transfers was subsequently invested through Highland Investment Partners. I paused, letting the name register. "A firm where Mayor Wilson's brother-in-law serves as investment director." A murmur swept through the chamber. Mayor Wilson, seated at the center of the council, had gone completely still. My final slide showed the full circle, pension funds moving from city workers' accounts through the approval process and ultimately generating management fees for Highland Partners. I have prepared a complete dossier with all supporting documentation, drawn entirely from public records. Copies have been delivered to the State Attorney General's office, the FBI Public Corruption Division, and 5 journalists from different news organizations. This last part was a bluff. I had prepared the dossiers but hadn't delivered them yet. I'm happy to answer any questions from the council. The chamber erupted in confused discussion. Mayor Wilson called for order, his face ashen. From the back of the room, I saw Chief Amara quietly slip out the door. Council President Odom leaned into his microphone. "Ms. Kelman, these are extremely serious allegations. Do you understand the implications of what you're presenting in a public forum?" "I do, sir. That's why I've relied solely on verifiable public records for this presentation." Paul was now standing, attempting to catch the council president's attention, but he was ignored as Odom continued. "I move that we immediately convene a special investigation committee with Ms. Kelman as a principal witness." The motion passed unanimously, even with Mayor Wilson's visibly reluctant vote. As I gathered my materials, I felt someone approach from behind. Turning, I found Detective Ash standing there. "That," he said quietly, "was either the bravest or most reckless thing I've ever witnessed." "Possibly both," I admitted, my hands finally beginning to shake now that it was over. "They'll come after you hard now," he warned. "You've backed them into a corner publicly. Dangerous people don't just surrender when exposed." "I know." I tucked my presentation materials into my bag. "That's why this is just the beginning." As we walked out of the council chambers, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Check your email. You have allies where you least expect them." The message could be a trap, another attempt to discredit me, or it could be genuine support from someone still inside the department. Either way, I had crossed a line from which there was no returning. The real battle was just beginning. The next 48 hours passed in a blur of depositions, emergency meetings, and constant vigilance. I barely slept, alternating between answering questions from hastily assembled investigative committees and checking my surroundings for potential threats. The email mentioned in the mysterious text contained internal communications showing that Chief Amara had been pressured into removing me from the case. More importantly, it revealed the existence of a secret backup server where all the corrupted transaction records were still intact, preserved by an IT specialist who had grown suspicious of repeated requests to delete specific data. While the public firestorm grew, I received an unexpected call from Paula. "You actually did it," she said, her voice a mixture of awe and terror. "The whole department is in chaos. Paul hasn't shown up for 2 days." Thomas Weldon was photographed entering the federal building this morning. "Are you safe?" I asked. "For now." She hesitated. "There's something else. Someone left an unmarked envelope on my desk this morning. Inside was a key card for the records archive and a note saying, Sub-Basement C, Row 47. The records archive was a vast underground storage facility beneath City Hall where physical documents were kept. Sub-Basement C housed the oldest, rarely accessed files. "Can you get it to me?" I asked. 3 hours later, I was using the borrowed keycard to enter the dimly lit archive. The musty smell of old paper filled the air as I navigated through towering shelves of boxed records. Row 47 contained financial documentation from 8 years earlier. A.S. year, the year Thomas Weldon had retired, and Paul had been promoted to supervisor. The box I sought was unmarked except for a date range. Inside, buried beneath mundane budget reports, I found what someone had wanted me to discover: a handwritten ledger tracking special allocations dating back nearly a decade. Names, dates, amounts, all meticulously recorded in what I recognized as Thomas Weldon's distinctive handwriting. This wasn't just about pension funds. The scheme had begun with smaller, targeted thefts from various city accounts, gradually expanding as they gained confidence. My mother's pension reduction hadn't been random. Her name appeared alongside dozens of others with a notation: previous department whistleblowers, troublemakers. They had been systematically punishing anyone who had ever questioned authority or reported improprieties, while rewarding those who looked the other way. I photographed every page before carefully returning the ledger. As I exited the archive, my phone buzzed with a news alert. Mayor Wilson announces temporary leave of absence amid financial investigation. Things were moving faster than I'd anticipated. The exposed threads were unraveling quickly, with officials scrambling to distance themselves from the growing scandal. That evening, Detective Ash met me at a diner far from our usual locations. "The state attorney general has officially taken over the investigation," he informed me, sliding into the booth. "They've issued preservation orders for all financial records going back 10 years. That's good news, right?" His expression remained grim. Yes and no. The wider this gets, the more desperate certain people become. Paul's been located at his cabin upstate. Apparently, he's cooperating, claiming he was just following orders. "Typical," I muttered. "Here's what you don't know," Ash continued, lowering his voice. "Thomas Weldon hasn't just disappeared. He's actively trying to negotiate immunity in exchange for testimony against everyone else involved, including you." "Me? I wasn't involved." "He's claiming you knew about the scheme all along and only went public when you weren't given a larger cut." Ash's eyes met mine. "It's absurd, but he's desperate and connected. If he can create enough doubt about your credibility." I pushed my untouched coffee aside, suddenly nauseous. "He's trying to make me the scapegoat." "Exactly. They need someone to take the fall, and the whistleblower makes a convenient target. They're painting you as a disgruntled employee seeking revenge." "Which is partly true," I admitted. I was disgruntled. "There's a difference between exposing corruption and committing it," Ash said firmly. "But perception matters. They're working to shape the narrative before all the evidence comes to light." The next morning, I woke to find my face plastered across local news outlets. "Questionable motives. Key whistleblower's history under scrutiny," read one headline. Another stated, "Sources question analysts' sudden discovery of long-running scheme." They were implementing a classic discreditation strategy, not denying the allegations outright, but questioning my motives and timing to cast doubt on everything I'd presented. My phone rang constantly with reporters seeking comments. I declined them all, following the Attorney General's advice to avoid public statements while the investigation proceeded. On day 5, after my counsel presentation, I received an official summons to appear before a special grand jury the following week. The same day, an anonymous envelope appeared in my mailbox containing copies of my personal bank statements with certain transactions circled in red, ordinary deposits like my paycheck and a birthday check from my mother, but presented to imply suspicious activity. The message was clear. They could fabricate evidence against me just as easily as I had exposed evidence against them. That night, Alone in my apartment with the blinds drawn, I experienced my first moment of true doubt. Had I miscalculated? These were powerful people with resources and connections I couldn't match. They had decades of experience covering their tracks. What if they succeeded in turning this around on me? I was pulled from this spiral by an unexpected knock at my door. Peering through the peephole, I was shocked to see Chief Amara standing in the hallway. Cautiously, I opened the door. "Chief, may I come in?" she asked, her usual commanding presence somewhat diminished. She looked tired, her normally immaculate appearance slightly disheveled. I hesitated, then stepped aside. She entered, declining my offer of water or coffee. "I won't take much of your time," she said, remaining standing. "I'm here because I owe you an explanation. For removing me from the case? For that and more." She squared her shoulders. "When I first brought you onto the investigation, I genuinely believed we were seeking the truth. What I didn't know then was how extensive the corruption had become, or that my own supervisor was involved. The commissioner," I realized aloud. She nodded. "3 days into your investigation, he called me into his office. He had photos, my sister's drug rehab stint that we'd kept private, my mother's undocumented status. He made it clear, either I shut down your investigation or they would destroy my family." The admission hung in the air between us. "Why are you telling me this now?" I finally asked. "Because tomorrow morning I'm testifying before the Attorney General. I'm bringing everything I know, including the commissioner's threats." She met my eyes directly. "I've already moved my family to a secure location. Whatever happens next, I need you to know I didn't betray you willingly." After she left, I sat in silence, processing this new information. Chief Amara's testimony would add crucial credibility to my evidence. The commissioner's involvement explained how they had been able to manipulate investigations for so long without detection. The next week passed in a whirlwind of depositions, evidence submissions, and security precautions. The investigation had expanded beyond the Financial Crimes Unit to include the mayor's office, the pension board, and several private investment firms. Paul had turned state's evidence, confirming much of what I'd uncovered while attempting to minimize his own role. Thomas Weldon remained elusive, his whereabouts unknown after his initial contact with federal authorities. The grand jury was scheduled to begin hearing comprehensive testimony in 2 days. I had been preparing extensively with prosecutors, organizing my evidence and practicing my explanations of complex financial maneuvers in simple, accessible terms. The evening before my testimony, I received a text from Detective Ash. "Emergency. Meet at the second location. Now." We had established several meeting points for emergencies. The second location was a 24-hour laundromat with multiple exits. I found Ash waiting in his unmarked car across the street. He didn't speak until I was inside with the doors locked. "Thomas Weldon resurfaced," he said grimly. "He's scheduled to testify tomorrow, before you." "What's he planning to say?" My source couldn't get specifics, but Weldon spent 6 hours with his lawyers today. The rumor is he's prepared a comprehensive alternative narrative that acknowledges the scheme but redirects blame. My stomach tightened. Toward me, and others. Apparently, he's bringing documentation showing that several rogue employees orchestrated everything without his knowledge. That's absurd. His handwriting is all over the ledger I found, which hasn't been officially entered into evidence yet, Ash reminded me. You photographed it but left the original in place. If someone removed it since then, the realization hit me like a physical blow. I'd been so careful to preserve the evidence that I might have given them time to destroy it. "We need to get back into that archive," I said. "Impossible tonight. Security's been doubled around all city records since this broke." I pressed my fingers to my temples, thinking rapidly. There has to be something we're missing. Weldon wouldn't resurface unless he believed he had a way out. Or unless he's desperate, Ash suggested. His accounts have been frozen. His reputation is destroyed. This testimony might be his last attempt to salvage something. We spent hours strategizing, trying to anticipate Weldon's arguments and prepare counterpoints. By the time I returned home, it was past midnight. I fell into an uneasy sleep, waking repeatedly from dreams where I stood alone before a hostile jury, while Paul and Weldon pointed accusing fingers. Morning came too quickly. I dressed carefully in a conservative suit, reviewing my notes one final time before heading to the courthouse. News vans lined the street, reporters calling out questions as I made my way up the steps. Inside, I was directed to a waiting room where witnesses were sequestered before testimony. To my surprise, Paula was already there, looking nervous but determined. They called me to testify about the emails I saved, she explained. I couldn't stay silent anymore. Thank you, I said, genuinely moved by her courage. A court officer appeared at the door. Mr. Weldon will testify first, followed by Ms. Kelman. As Weldon passed me on his way into the grand jury room, he paused momentarily. His once commanding presence had diminished. He looked older, haunted, but his eyes held a disturbing confidence as they met mine. Nothing personal, he murmured before continuing through the door. For the next 3 hours, I waited, imagining what lies he might be spinning. When the door finally reopened, Weldon emerged, looking satisfied. He didn't glance in my direction as he was escorted out another exit. Ms. Kelman, the court officer called. They're ready for you. The grand jury room was imposing, 23 citizens seated in tiered rows, the prosecutors at a table to the side. I took my place at the witness stand, was sworn in, and waited for the questioning to begin. The lead prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Jessie Winters, approached. Ms. Kelman, thank you for appearing today. Before we begin your planned testimony, I'd like to address some statements made by the previous witness. My heart raced. Here it came, Weldon's accusations, the alternative narrative, the attempt to make me the scapegoat. Mr. Weldon has testified that you approached him approximately 2 years ago with concerns about pension fund discrepancies. Is this correct? I blinked, confused by the question. No, I never spoke directly with Mr. Weldon about any concerns. He further stated that you were systematically blocked from pursuing these concerns by your supervisor, Paul Renner, that your reports were consistently buried or altered. Is this accurate? Yes, that part is true, but, Mr. Weldon claims that he retired because he was being pressured to participate in the scheme and refused. He states that he kept detailed records of all suspicious transactions and approvals as insurance, which he provided to you recently through an anonymous drop. Is any of this accurate? Suddenly, I understood. Weldon hadn't accused me. He'd created a narrative where he was a fellow whistleblower, a behind-the-scenes ally who had been secretly documenting the corruption all along. It was breathtakingly audacious and completely false. No, I stated firmly. That is not what happened. Mr. Weldon was a principal architect of this scheme, not an opponent of it. The ledger I discovered was in his handwriting, documenting how funds were diverted, not exposing it. For the next 4 hours, I methodically dismantled Weldon's alternative narrative, presenting my evidence in the clear, detailed manner that had always been my strength. I explained complex financial mechanisms in accessible terms, connecting each piece of evidence to specific actions by specific individuals. When I finally emerged from the grand jury room, exhausted but relieved, Detective Ash was waiting. How bad was it? He asked. Weldon tried to recast himself as a secret whistleblower, I explained. Claimed he'd been documenting everything to expose it someday. Ash let out a low whistle. Bold strategy. It might have worked if I hadn't been so. I paused, the irony suddenly striking me. So detailed in my analysis. My evidence timeline makes his story impossible. 6 weeks later, the grand jury returned indictments against 15 individuals, including Paul Renner, Thomas Weldon, former Mayor Wilson, and the pension board chairman. The charges ranged from fraud and embezzlement to obstruction of justice and witness tampering. Chief Amara, cleared of wrongdoing after her testimony about being coerced, implemented a department-wide reform of financial crimes investigations. Her first act was to create a new special analysis unit with complete investigative independence. I'd like you to head it, she told me in her newly redecorated office. The previous commissioner's dark wood and leather replaced with modern, transparent glass. Your approach, your thoroughness, is exactly what this department needs. I considered her offer. I'd want complete autonomy to pursue investigations wherever they lead. No simplified versions, no politically expedient conclusions. That's precisely why I'm asking you, she replied. Corruption thrives when we settle for simplified narratives. Your refusal to do so broke this case open. On my first day leading the new unit, I arrived early to set up my office. Through the glass walls, I watched as workers updated the department signage, adding Special Analysis Unit to the directory. My desk phone rang, my first official call in the new position. Special Analysis Unit, Vera Kelman speaking. Ms. Kelman, the voice belonged to the State Attorney General. I wanted to personally inform you that Thomas Weldon's immunity request has been formally denied. His trial date is set for March. Thank you for letting me know. There's more. During preparation for trial, we discovered something you'll find interesting. Those pension reductions targeting troublemakers? The list was created before you joined the department, but your name was added to it 6 months ago, after your first detailed report questioning an internal approval process. After we hung up, I sat back in my chair, absorbing this information. They had targeted my mother to punish me for being too thorough, for seeing patterns they wanted to remain hidden. Later that afternoon, I walked past the holding cells where Paul waited for transport to the county jail. His eyes found mine through the bars. The arrogance that had defined him was gone, replaced by something hollow. I never thought you'd actually pursue it this far, he said quietly. It was supposed to be a simple operation. Skim a little from thousands of accounts. Spread the loss so widely nobody would notice or care enough to fight. That was your mistake, I replied, assuming that details don't matter, that people don't matter. For what it's worth, adding your mother to the list wasn't my idea. Weldon insisted, said we needed to teach you to simplify, to stop looking so closely. I considered this final irony, that their attempt to punish me for being too detailed had ultimately led to their exposure, that the very quality they had dismissed and denigrated had become their undoing. Goodbye, Paul, I said, turning away. As I walked back to my office, Detective Ash fell into step beside me. How does it feel? He asked. Finally seeing justice in motion? I thought about the question. The satisfaction was real, but different than I'd imagined. It wasn't about Paul's humiliation or Weldon's failed attempt to escape consequences. It wasn't even about my promotion or vindication. It feels like restoration, I finally answered. Not just for me, but for everyone they hurt, every pension they reduced, every career they stunted, every truth they buried. 6 months later, I stood in the courtroom as the verdicts were read. Guilty on all counts for Thomas Weldon, guilty on most counts for Paul and the others. Mandatory minimum sentences, ensuring they would spend years, not months, behind bars. The pension funds were being restored through seized assets and civil penalties. My mother had received a letter apologizing for the accounting error in her retirement benefits, along with full restitution plus interest. As I left the courthouse, a young analyst from the department approached me tentatively. Ms. Kelman, I just wanted to say, your case changed everything for people like me. They don't dismiss our detailed reports anymore. They actually listen now. Her words were the sweetest part of my revenge, not the punishment of those who had wronged me, but the transformation of the system that had enabled them. The validation of thorough, detailed work that sees the full picture instead of the convenient one. My revenge wasn't in watching them fall. It was in building something better from the ruins of what they had corrupted. It was in knowing that the next person who noticed something wrong wouldn't be silenced or dismissed for being too thorough. Sometimes the best revenge isn't dramatic or loud. Sometimes it's simply creating a world where the truth, in all its detailed, complex glory, finally matters. If this story resonated with you, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe. Have you ever been told you were too much of something, too detailed, too passionate, too persistent, only to find that quality became your greatest strength? Share your experience in the comments below. Remember, what others dismiss as your weakness might actually be your superpower.